Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear viewers, to another segment of the Pool of Ideas. As the name suggests, the program is about a list of ideologies that we are trying to look into, trying to understand in a very comprehensive manner. There are a number of ideologies that we've gone through, and there are a number of ideologies that we are still going to tackle and trying to portray in a very simple way, but in a very important way as well. One of the unique features of this program is that we will present these ideas with an Islamic twist, so you can understand the perception, the Islamic perception on these subjects as well. Our discussion for today is on the time or the topic of the Renaissance, and inshallah ta'ala we will have a list of questions, and our guest for the program is with us, Dr. Mahmoud Al-Khalifa. I'd like to welcome you to the program. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Doctor, we've got the particular period in history that we would like to discuss, known as the Renaissance. Could I ask you to give us a brief introduction into this subject?
Renaissance is a translation of, you can translate it as a rebirth. And in the case of Western Renaissance, it's a rebirth of the Greek, revival of the Greek-Roman tradition and literatures, the classical tradition, which saw great literary and artistic productions.
Okay.
So simply, that's Renaissance.
Okay, excellent. And
it is when the West started to reconnect with its Greek past, Greek-Roman past and greatness.
So is it possible to say it's when the West became a little bit more traditional?
No, when the West, not traditional, when the West started to rise against the control of the church and its restrictive ideas, and into the secular humanist traditions of Greek-Roman traditions.
Okay, and so
which were pagan pagan, but much more advanced in terms of literary and artistic, philosophical productions.
Okay, excellent. So what is the connection between the Renaissance and the Enlightenment period?
Actually, the Renaissance, think of the Renaissance as stage number 1 of Enlightenment.
Okay.
Because Enlightenment goes from the 16th to the 18th century,
sure,
with a progressive dependence on reason as against dogma.
Okay.
Because during the Renaissance time, still the church had its own control. Okay. But basically, it was a tug of war between the church and the new sciences and the new philosophies.
Okay, so this period, if I'm right in understanding, was a struggle between the church and the state, if we can say that, and slowly over time the influence of the church was diminishing. Is that right?
No, it wasn't between the state and the church. It was between the state and the new kind of learning and understanding that really challenged the authority of the church.
Okay.
For example, in terms of science, they started this idea of, influenced by Arab scholars and Arab philosophy, Western writers like Francis Bacon started to concentrate on observation as a very valid way of looking into nature and its secrets.
Okay.
You have started to have a Copernicus, the Copernican revolution.
Sure.
This idea that the Earth is not the center of the universe.
Okay.
You have the Newtonian, and then you have, before Copernicus, you have Galileo Galilei.
Okay.
He had his own ideas. Galileo Galilei comes second to Copernicus. So basically, these new discoveries in the world of science and knowledge challenged established dogma,
okay,
which was taken to be the word of God.
Right.
Because it was sanctioned by the church, it was difficult to challenge the existing dogma which is taught by the church and maintained through the authority of the church.
So, Doctor, what was the response then of the church when people did come with these new ideas and new philosophies that challenged the traditional approach?
Very simple. It was by burning people at the stake as heretics.
Okay.
So science was thought of as a work of devil and heretics.
Okay.
And basically and forcing people to recant on their ideas. So Galileo Galilei had to go in 1661 and recant on his discoveries.
Okay.
So the church started a torture campaign against people against science.
Right.
In order to stifle it, because science and the new sciences sort of challenged the church's authority, which was based on certain Aristotelian ideas about the universe and place of Earth and so on.
Sure. So this is one of the reasons to why many people today are so resilient towards religion and science, because they still hold this view that maybe Islam is the same as Christianity.
No, Islam is rose in totally different in a totally different situation, and actually Islam encouraged science and was based on science, because even this interest in let us say in literacy was shown by the Prophet ﷺ when he took certain prisoners after Badr, the Battle of Badr. The first real battle in Islam. He took some of the some of those prisoners were let go, provided that they taught some Muslims how to write and read.
So the Prophet ﷺ placing emphasis on knowledge and all on the varieties of knowledge.
Yeah,
as well.
if you place emphasis on literacy, this is just tip number one.
Okay.
But in the church. During the time when the church was in control, those were dark ages where the only literate people were priests. The only people who have access to the Bible, who've had access to the Bible, were priests, because it was written in languages, in Latin and Greek, and in languages which were not accessible to the ordinary English or French. So the religious knowledge wasn't like a common thing like in the Islamic world during the Prophet's time, where everybody's aware of the tenets of Islam, can read the Quran. No, and the Holy Book was not available for the layman.
Okay.
You had to go to the church and listen to a priest reading from a language you don't understand, and then he would just make some comments and so on. So it was access to the Holy Book was restricted to the priesthood.
Okay, and during the time, the Renaissance period, as we discussed, what was this new philosophy about humanism or humanistic philosophy?
During the Christian period, the 10th centuries of the rule of the papacy and the Christian church, it was this idea that people had to have access to knowledge via certain priests, via people, and this idea of humanism came as a result, as a let us say, as a counter ideology.
Okay.
If Christianity limited people's perspectives, humanism unleashed human potential by allowing people to think about themselves, by encouraging individualism, not communalism, by encouraging individual thinking, and by emphasizing individualism and individual freedom.
So would it be a form of liberalism, liberating the mind?
So in a kind of, on that time you could say it is. Because if we draw a circle, we can draw two circles. The first circle would have God in the middle. That's the time when the church was, and you can replace God by the church, because it is God according to the church.
Sure.
And then with humanism, we started to have, of course, God was at the center, and then man was on the periphery.
Okay.
Humanism replaced this whole thing where you have God on the periphery and man in the center of attention. So basically, humanism was a way of reversing the authority of the church by totally emphasizing man over the idea of religious belief.
Okay. And during this period, the Renaissance, what was the freedom of religion like?
During Renaissance, of course, it was a period where people would not openly challenge the church or openly claim that they are atheists.
Okay.
There was a veneer of religiosity over all whatever they said.
Okay.
They were reading the literatures of the Greek and Romans and this old pagan, right? But as well, they were not totally challenging the Christian belief.
Okay, so people were working secretly and not exposing themselves to the dangers.
Not secretly, but they would not challenge religious dogma openly.
Okay. Okay. So, like you said previously, that if a person was to challenge new ideas, coming up with new ideas, they were considered to be heretics or people who have disobeyed God. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that was, there was, as I just said, the famous case of Galileo Galilei, who had to recant on his ideas about the place of the sun and earth in the universe.
Sure.
Because he used telescopes, and telescopes developed which benefited from the Arabs. We'll come to that. And you can, of course, we'll come to that, but I can just refer to the fact that a Western Renaissance did not come out of the blue. It came from a Muslim humanistic tradition with Muslim madrasas and schools.
Okay.
And universities.
Okay, Doctor, on that note, I want to ask you to hold your thought, because when we come back from the break, I really want to talk about the contribution that Islam gave to the European Renaissance. So we'll come back on that just in a few moments. Dear viewers, let's take a short break here, and then when we come back, we'll have a look at the contribution that Islam made to the Renaissance at the time when you can see the Western world going through what they call the Dark Ages. The Muslim world was actually going through quite the opposite. We'll talk about that when we get back from our break.
Open your eyes to the world of today. Open your eyes to the world of today.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear viewers, joining us here on our fantastic program, The Pool of Ideas, where we're looking at a number of different ideologies. And our ideology, or our idea for this particular program, is the Renaissance. Now, Doctor, if we come back to what we were discussing just prior to the break, which is very interesting, talking about the contribution that Islam made to Europe's Renaissance. Could you elaborate on that, please?
But while Europe wallowed in darkness for 10 centuries, Islam was in its best golden ages. Okay. During the Abbasid period, you have, during the Umayyad period, you have Islam reaching to Andalusia and to the borders of China in terms of geographical expansion. But it wasn't all about territorial expansion. It's about the expansion of the Muslim intellect.
Okay.
And basically, there was that time during the rule of the Ma'mun,
sure.
One of the major Abbasid rulers and caliphs. This man was very much interested in knowledge and science, so he had many books translated into Arabic from Greek, from Greek and Roman and other sources, and Syriac. Translated. He had all that translated into Arabic,
sure.
And that was saved a lot of human knowledge from destruction during the dark period of Western civilization.
Okay.
So most of the literature, Greek books on medicine, on literature, on philosophy, on rhetoric, all these books were translated into Arabic.
Okay.
And later on, they were retranslated from Arabic into Latin in Andalusia.
Okay.
So Andalusia worked as a kind of connected East and West, Islam and Western countries. So basically, Islam has preserved, not just preserved Greek and Roman important works, but it has produced its own intellectual contribution.
Okay.
And all these books were translated into Latin, then into the European vernaculars, other languages, and as such, the Western Renaissance owes a lot to Muslim civilization.
Okay.
Some people will, of course, try to discount the Muslim influence, but it is there. Books of medicine, like the ones by Al-Zahrawi,
Right.
they were translated into English and into Latin and into other languages. And these were some of the Arabic books translated into Latin were used in 13th and 14th century during the period of Renaissance. They were taught in Western universities during the Middle Ages.
Okay.
Some of the books were taught as late as the 17th century.
So, Doctor, not just the very fact that Muslims were tolerant enough to accept other people's books and languages and adopt them into their own, but also they preserved other people's knowledge at the same time.
Yeah, and this is very important because Islam has its own humanistic tradition of being open to other cultures that, for example, ran counter to its main ideas. I mean, Islam would not welcome paganism, but it did not like burn down books it translated books. The Muslims benefited from books that related to the medical sciences and other sciences.
Sure.
They were not interested in everything. They wrote commentaries on philosophers. You have Avicenna or Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd, influencing the scholastic tradition by offering extensive commentaries on Greek philosophy, which were translated and used later on in Western society, in Western academic circles.
Okay, so Doctor, you mentioned prior to the break that whenever somebody in the Western, in the Dark Ages, a thinker or a scientist came with something new, the church would consider him to be heretic and possibly kill him. But in the Muslim world, if somebody came with something new, on the same level, they discover something new, how were they treated? Were they killed or were they welcomed?
Yeah, Al-Ma'mun was so much interested in getting more knowledge and translations into his the House of Wisdom, or Dar al-Hikmah, the biggest libraries in the world at the time. Actually, Iraq and Baghdad was the seat of power in the world and the seat of intellectual knowledge until it was sacked in the 13th century by the barbarians, the Tartars, and destroying one of the finest humanistic civilizations ever seen in human history. So basically, what I want to say is, Al-Ma'mun would give him the weight of the book in gold.
Right.
And one of the interesting things, those who translated books from Greek and Roman languages into Arabic, they were not necessarily Muslims or Arabs.
Okay, interesting.
Other people were allowed to do that. Nestorians, people from other religious beliefs, they were given access to even the Caliph himself.
So he gave such an incentive that everybody wanted to write.
Yeah,
and translate.
everybody belonged.
Okay.
Look, in a humanistic tradition, in a liberal society, everybody is welcome to contribute.
Okay.
In intolerant, fascist, ultranationalist societies, you penalize people for a simple difference like wearing full clothes, like the burkini in France.
Okay.
So a civilization prides itself only on being tolerant towards difference.
Okay, so Doctor, medieval Islam, was it tolerant for its time, irrespective of whenever we hear now, when we hear
it is tolerant for our time.
Even still to this day?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the kind of people who thrived in the course of Baghdad, Christians, Jews, Muslims, who thrived in the course of Cordoba, Grenada, and these places. There were Muslims, Christians, and especially Jews.
Okay, so Doctor, could you talk about the transition? So you mentioned Baghdad being a capital of knowledge with Dar al-Hikmah, like you mentioned, but then also we have Spain, where we also have a period of absolutely amazing development. What was going on there?
Actually, Islam, the catastrophic event in Baghdad and the Reconquista wars, they dealt a very strong blow to the development of Islamic knowledge and science. And it was time for science to go somewhere else.
Okay.
Because the destruction wreaked on Baghdad, and the destruction of the by the Reconquista because in 1492 the last Muslim pocket of resistance to the invading armies of the Catholics.
So sorry, who was responsible for the invasion of Baghdad and the destruction of the
The
books?
Tartars were involved in the destruction of Baghdad in the 13th century.
Okay.
And like 1 century later, 1 century and a half, you have the Reconquista with the Spanish reconquered territories of Muslims in Islamic Spain, thus putting an end to the two prides, two jewels of world civilization.
Okay. And when we look at Islamic Spain, or Andalus as it's called, some of the major developments we can talk about, like the science and the philosophy, and also many other things, mathematics and algebra and so on and so forth. How important were these developments to the modern world today?
Of course, for example, let us go to the algorithms.
Okay.
Algorithms is very important to computers. Without the idea of algorithms, you could not have created the commands in a computer or this system, this closed system that is called the computer.
Sure.
So Muslims had a very, they contributed greatly to the basics of science, without which science would not have achieved what it achieved.
Okay. And Doctor, so why is it then that when we go through our schooling system, university system, that we're never even given a hint of the contribution of Islam towards science and technology? Rather, we're taught of medieval Islam to be like a mad, crazy bunch of people.
I guess the reason is that people in control of ministries of education and people who put the educational philosophy, they want to discount Islam's contribution to world civilization in order to say that secularism is a solution, because they have studied in the West, they come to think of education from a different point of view.
Okay.
They don't have a place for religion in general and Islam in particular. They're totally secularized people. And that's why religion and Islamic history is not a priority.
Okay.
They want to model their progress or model their educational systems on Western educational systems.
Okay.
Forgetting that Islam had anything to contribute to, even to modern education.
Okay.
Especially that we're talking about Renaissance.
Sure.
Renaissance started in Greek and Roman traditions.
Okay.
When the West wanted to develop and be reborn, it reached back to its traditions.
Okay.
We're not even allowed to reach back to our traditions, and we ignore our traditions at our risk.
And also, Doctor, my final question for this particular episode, it comes back to, you mentioned the solution. What would you say is the solution for the Muslims now? I mean, we all want to go back to those beautiful days. What do we do? Do we look towards secularism? Do we look towards some other ism or schism? What should we do, and what is our solution?
What I see is that secularism has failed miserably in the Arab world, because all we get is a secularized elite that wants to control the rest of society and model it according to an idea taken from China or Marxism or Russia or America, or France, whatever. So this did not work. This started in the 60s. Now we are in 2016. That was a long time, like 50 years. We tried Marxism, communism, nationalism, all failed.
Okay.
You can see failed states in Syria, Iraq. You can see weak countries like Egypt. Egypt ranks 139 in education
139.
worldwide.
Right.
Out of 140 nations, Egypt ranks 139.
So second from the bottom.
Yeah. So if you look at a country that is so central to the Islamic and Arab world as being so back in terms of health and education, then you have a real problem.
Okay.
So basically, nationalism and secularism has not brought any advancement to the Islamic world.
Okay, so hopefully, Doctor, because we are running out of time now, but in a future episode, maybe we can dedicate some time to the solution and how we can bring about the solution in a practical way as well. So on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for coming to our program today, and also like to conclude by saying Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for having me. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much. Dear viewers, we've come to the end of our program here, The Pool of Ideas, where we had a fantastic discussion about the Renaissance. And subhanAllah, isn't it amazing? Doesn't it make you feel so proud when you look at our history, not just in Baghdad, but also in our history in Spain, and see the contributions that we made, not just in philosophy and science and technology, but also in human rights, also in the fact of how we were the most tolerant people that were around in history at that time, and still to this day. So dear viewers, we've got to look into ourselves, and we've got to also prosper and try to revive these sciences, revive this mentality of being prosperous even today. Dear viewers, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to our program, The Pool of Ideas. And we conclude here, and we will see you on our next episode. So until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.